Good evening. It's Friday, April 29th. Welcome to the New York Symposium with Diane Sayre. I'm Diane Sayre, LaRouche independent candidate for U.S. Senate against Chuck Schumer. And the title of this evening's discussion is Whom the Gods Would Destroy, They First Make Mad. And this idea goes back to ancient Greece and probably earlier, that it was observed that the first thing that people lose is their mind. And I think we really are seeing that from most of the leaders of the Western world. What I would like to do is just a short overview, and then we're going to bring in our guest of this evening, introduced by a short poetic interlude, which is exceedingly important because it's important that all of us take care to nourish our mind with beauty and with creativity, because that's what distinguishes us from all other species. And by the way, what distinguishes human beings from computers. We are capable of coming up with an entirely new conception in the domain of our own reason, which is what all great scientists have done and all great musicians and artists. And we need a lot more of those if we're going to get out of this crisis. So let me just say that the escalation of war against Russia by the United States, NATO, and directed by the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, and British intelligence agencies continues. Helga Zepp-LaRouche thought that it was notable that Germany reversed itself and decided that they will indeed be sending heavy weapons to arm the Nazis in Ukraine. Biden is calling for $33 billion, of which $20 billion will be for weapons, again, to aid Nazis who are committing horrible war crimes. That is, it is not Russia that's committing the war crimes. Russia was taking preemptive action, which they made very clear was to prevent a showdown if Ukraine joined NATO, that you could have a nuclear war between NATO and Russia over Crimea. So Putin's actions were preemptive, both to stop a terrible slaughter in the Donbass, which was being planned, and they now have documentation proving that the Ukrainian army was going to move, and they already had killed 14,000 civilians over 8 years. But they were planning a real assault on that region, and Ukraine's threat to not only join NATO, but to develop nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, in the United States and the West, we are under the most unbelievable wartime propaganda with Ukrainian flags flying everywhere. And I would ask Americans to consider when we were bombing Afghanistan or Iraq or invading Syria, who was talking about what was happening to those people, what was being done on the ground? The fact that millions of Afghan people right now are threatened with death by starvation. Who is speaking about this? We're not allowed to consider it. And we have very great hyperinflation in the United States as a result of the sanctions policy creating scarcity of food and other commodities, but also belying the real crisis, which is the blowout of the transatlantic financial system. Just a little bit of talk of perhaps raising the interest rates 50 basis points caused a major tumbling on the stock market, with the largest holders of the derivatives obligations being the hardest hit. We also have in the United States a total breakdown of infrastructure. Our rail transportation system is in terrible disarray, and apparently, although we have fertilizer from previous years or what we ever have in storage available, but we can't get the fertilizer to the farmers in time to produce food, in time to plant their crops. So again, you see just the total incompetence. Now, a couple days ago, or last week, you may have heard that Poland and Bulgaria were not going to pay for natural gas in rubles, so Russia cut off the supply. Why should people expect to get natural gas for free? In other words, this is not Russia's sabotage. They said, and rightly so, since the United States and others stole $300 billion in Russia's foreign reserves. So Russia said, okay, if you're going to get natural gas from us and you're a hostile country, you have to pay in rubles. Well, those nations chose not to pay in rubles, so Russia chose not to sell them natural gas. Why Russia is being blamed for that is just indicative of the kind of lunacy that we see. And then perhaps the last example of the insanity, where it's really very important because most people in the United States actually don't think we should have a nuclear war with Russia or even China. While people may be perhaps a bit more brainwashed about China than they are about Russia, they don't think we should have a war with these countries. We have terrible problems here. They're not imminently threatening to attack us. Ukraine is really not of strategic interest to the United States, and neither is Taiwan. So, what people would prefer is to not have a military engagement and to see action on the economy. How can they make their voice known? Well, long ago in the United States, we used to have representative government, and we actually had more transparent elections than we have today, so that if you were very unhappy with what your congressman or senator was doing, you could go to a town hall meeting, you could write a letter, you could protest in front of their office, and they would get the message that perhaps they might not be reelected if they continued with that policy, and you had a means of getting a change because the government had to represent your views if they wanted to be reelected. Well, nowadays there's not very much regard for transparency in elections in the United States, and they are doing things to make it impossible for people to participate. And we see this in an extreme form in the state of New York, where, aside from what people who watch my program already know, that if you're an independent candidate in a statewide race, your signature requirement has been tripled from 15,000 to 45,000, but in the same 6-week period of time. But also, New York, due to the 2020 census population, New York lost population relative to other parts of the country. So we lost the congressional district, and it meant all of the districts had to be redrawn. So what happened was, supposedly due to the pandemic, this was not done in 2021, which would be normal. It was put off until the end of last year rather than June or August. And they came up with a very wildly gerrymandered district to eliminate as many Republican seats as possible. Well, the governor signed off on this. And for the Republican and Democratic primary elections, people went off and petitioned to get candidates on the ballot for those districts. In the middle of the primary process, it was determined correctly, just the timing is terrible, that the districts were unconstitutional, which of course threw all of this petitioning into a cocked hat, because how could you get your signatures in the right area if the area changed in the middle of when you were petitioning? At any rate, a judge put a stay on that. It looked like it was going to go back to what Hochul had signed off on, but then a higher court overturned it again, rightly so. We're now in a situation in the state of New York where there are no congressional district lines. They have not yet been drawn. They're supposed to be drawn by May 24th. That is 1 week before the petitioning deadline for independent candidates. So people who are running for Congress have absolutely no idea where they should be petitioning. For people like myself, I'm required to get 500 valid signatures in each of 13 congressional districts, but we don't know where the districts are. So you can see that they clearly have no intent to have an election, because they don't really care if people want to run or voters want to vote. They have a group of incumbents, and I guess they're supposed to stay there forever. And that eliminates, or appears to eliminate, the basis of the American people to intervene on the directionality of the country. Now, in reality, that's not true, because there is a principle of natural law. Friedrich Schiller wrote about this in the Rütli Oath in his play Wilhelm Tell, or William Tell, as people may know it. There is a limit to a tyrant's power. And he said, when the oppressed can bear it no longer, they seize their rights from the heavens themselves. In other words, how did the Berlin Wall come down? It wasn't through an election, and it also wasn't through violence. How did African Americans get the right to vote in the United States? That was not through an election. That was a decision brought about by their own poetic, nonviolent, direct action with really a heroic leader like Martin Luther King Jr. So we have a situation now in the West where it's incumbent upon us to stop this plunge toward what could really be thermonuclear war and the annihilation of the human species. And we don't seem to have an elected body which is resonant with the wishes of the American people. Campaigns such as mine can be a vehicle to make our ideas known, and people can do many things on their own to put the brakes on this madness. So what we're going to be discussing tonight is the poetic principle of this process, which is really urgent to understand. And I hope that it will give people some of the ammunition that you need to act. So with that, let me say we'll be hearing from Jerry Rose, who's on the National Executive Committee of the leadership of the LaRouche movement, known as the International Caucus of Labor Committees, as am I. But prior to that, we're going to hear from one of my campaign activists, Jose Vega, who is moderately famous for his getting thrown out of a meeting with Kamala Harris. And he will be sharing some poetic insights.
Yes, thank you, Diane, and I hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. I wanted to recite a poem called England in 1819. This will be very brief. It's a sonnet, and the title is self-evident what it's about. It's about England in the year 1819, and I will put it up here on the screen. I hope you can see that okay, Diane? Great. An old, mad, blind, despised, and dying king. Princes, the dregs of their dull race, who flow through public scorn, mud from a muddy spring. Rulers who neither see nor feel nor know, but leech-like to their fainting country cling, till they drop blind in blood without a blow. A people starved and stabbed in the untilled field, an army whom liberticide and prey make as a two-edged sword to all who wield. Golden and sanguine laws which tempt and slay, religion Christless, godless, a book sealed, a senate, time's worst statute unrepealed, are graves from which a glorious phantom may burst to illumine our tempestuous day. Thank you, Diane, for allowing me to share that with people. And there's Jerry Rose.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So look, we're in a breakdown crisis. Now, most people try to objectify that, and there are certainly objective predicates like the hyperinflation, the the threat of a billion people now under this sanction regime, the intention of the Malthusians is to have that happen. And these are all real. But this is a breakdown crisis of a classical proportion. And what do I mean by that? The ruling elites, and I use the word very loosely, the ruling elites are incapable of responding to the reality of the situation. For them, the hunger, for them, the poverty, for them, even the war, and the threat of nuclear annihilation doesn't exist. And LaRouche used to say all the time, whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad. And this is the ending of a very famous play by the poet Sophocles called Antigone. And the reason I go through this in a detailed way is that Greek civilization is the foundation of Western civilization. Nobody would argue that. That's straightforward. And the plays of, well, the two epic poems of Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and the great plays of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, they were performed as uh, um, religious events. The chorus was part of a religious ritual. The actors acted behind masks. There were 10,000 people learning their both history, as Shakespeare did in a different way in England, learning their history, learning the epic poetry, which identifies the relationship of a man to God and God and man to nature. So these were scientific works that established the basis of understanding reality. So these are not entertainments. They were the way before literacy, writing, was the way that history, epic history, was conveyed to a people that created a common language, created a common history, and created a way of thinking about reality, the relationship of man to God, the relationship of the man and God to the physical universe. So it's important to understand the terms of reference when LaRouche used to say, whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad. Because it's precisely the inability to respond to reality is their weak flank. They think it's their strong flank. They think that because they said something, it's the law, and since they have the power and to be tyrannical, although that's being challenged too by India, who said, you want to kill 1 billion people? But we're not going to let you. Russia is sending massive amounts of fertilizer. India had said they will produce the food that is not being produced in Ukraine, and they will feed the world as best they can, because they will not attack Russia, and they will not go with the sanctions. Neither will Argentina, who's another major food producer, and Brazil. So you have resistance to the madness of just asserting the irrational will, which is fascism, by the way. Fascism is the will to power. And I can go through a history of that, but I'm not going to tonight. So we are looking at a breakdown crisis, which leaves, if we understand what it is, then we can exploit their vulnerability. Because at the end of the play, Antigone, in which this comment is made by the chorus, whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad, the tyrant, Creon, decrees that the two brothers of Oedipus, and this is part of the Oedipus trilogy, Oedipus Rex, Oedipus at Colonus, and Antigone was the last play, that the two brothers well, brothers, sons, really, because of the nature of the Oedipal cycle, killed each other simultaneously. And therefore, Creon comes to power under very extraordinary circumstances. And he said, one brother's a hero, the other brother is evil, and we will not bury him, which was a very important part of the religious beliefs that the Greeks had. So it was a violation of what they understood the gods would expect. And Antigone, who was the daughter of Oedipus and daughter and, in a sense, sister, did never abandon Oedipus. Because the actual cycle, and I'm going to go through it quickly, I did it in a more extended fashion, which you can hear on the website, the TLO website, but I want to get to a critical point here. The Oedipus cycle starts with the city of Thebes racked by plague. And Oedipus, being a good king, says, we've got to get to the bottom of it. I cannot allow the people of my country to be destroyed. And he had sent Creon, who was then an adjutant, to the Delphi, the oracle at Delphi. He comes back and he says, there is an uncleanness in the state which we must root out. If we root out that uncleanness, then we will be able to return without the plague. So Oedipus, again, being a good king, insists that they get down to the bottom of it. And in one of his first speeches, he said, I don't care who it hits. I don't care what we learn. We must free the people from this disease. Now, Oedipus, as some of you may know, was slated to kill his father and marry his mother. This was a prophecy that was made at his birth by Tiresias, who was a very prominent seer. Now, the king of Thebes, who was not a good guy, decided, well, he had to kill his son. Now, he didn't want to do the job, so he told his wife, Jocasta, to have the son murdered so that the prophecy would not be fulfilled. Well, the wife, being a human being, decides to give it to a hunter to kill, and of course the hunter refuses in himself. He just can't do it, and he brings him to another state, very far away. And Oedipus was raised by the king and queen of that state because they had no children. Oedipus learns, he has no idea what his birth entailed, who his real parents were. He thought the parents he had were his parents. And therefore he hears of the prophecy that he would kill his father and marry his mother. So he runs away in order not to fulfill that prophecy. And in the course of running away, a tyrant says, "Get out of my way," and he was just completely insane and nasty. So Oedipus has a fight with him and kills him. Well, it happened to be his birth father, who he had no idea what the situation was. And then on his way to running away, he encounters the Sphinx and he's able to solve the riddle. He was a bit of a genius and able to solve the riddle of the Sphinx, which lifted the curse of the Sphinx off of the Theban people. And in gratitude, they make him king because the other king had been killed. And the king's wife, who happened to be his mother, but he had no idea, marries him, and they have 4 children. So the prophecy actually gets fulfilled, but he has no idea that's the reality of the situation. So in the course of searching this out, pieces of the puzzle reveal themselves. So finally, he calls Tiresias in, who actually knows what the story is and who he is. And he said, you must tell us what's going on here. And Tiresias says, you don't want to know. And Oedipus insists that we must know or the people of Thebes will be destroyed. So we must know. I do not care. And when it's finally revealed to him in the brilliant way that Sophocles does it, he breaks down and he pokes out both his eyes because he does not want to see again ever. And his wife commits suicide. So that's how Oedipus Rex ends. But the story doesn't end there. In Oedipus at Colonus, he is seeking refuge because Creon is pursuing Oedipus because he must choose between his 2 brothers' sons which one was to be the king. And Oedipus is seeking refuge in the forest of at the grove of Colonus. Creon brings an army and says to Oedipus, we will seize you. Now, here's a critical part of the story. The only one of his sons, daughters, whatever, and brother, sister, they were both, who stayed with him was Antigone. Antigone refused to leave him. And she was his eyes and guided him and never left his side. So she guides him to the sanctuary at Colonus. And Creon says, you must choose or go back. And he puts a curse on both of his sons, I guess, brothers, and says, they abandoned me in a terrible time, and I will have nothing to do with them. So he refuses, but Creon says, I'm going to bring you back and force you to do this. Theseus, who was the founder of Athens, who this grove was protected by, said to Creon, I don't know who this man is. I have no idea what his offense is, but this grove here is sacred ground, and you will not violate sanctuary for anyone, because the gods will choose how they will deal with perfidy. So here's Theseus, who founds Athens, says there is a higher law which you, with your power, Creon, will not violate. And there was he had a very powerful army. He was a hero himself, Theseus. So Creon had to leave. And Oedipus tells Antigone to leave him, take him to part of the grove where he can impart sacred knowledge to Theseus that he has learned through his great suffering. That he met his fate, took the full brunt of his fate, had lost everything, and Antigone stayed with him, the rest abandoned him. And Theseus, who has no idea, and it's very reminiscent of Leonora when she says, I don't know who this person is in the jail, but we must save him. The gods will decide how to deal with that, but we will not allow this oppression, right? So he imparts knowledge, sacred knowledge, to Theseus. And Theseus founds Athens. So Athens becomes the counterposition to Thebes. Now, and this is an amazing play, this Oedipus at Colonus. It's an amazing play. So now, Oedipus finally dies. Antigone goes back, and she is told she cannot bury her brother. It's against the law that Creon had made against the actual religion of the country and that particular nation state. And she says, no, it is you who violated the law. You violated everything sacred here. And you will.
Jose?
Yeah, I think he lost his connection.
Wow.
Yeah, not sure what happened
Just
there.
when it was getting very intense.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you can see if he comes back in.
Yeah, I can see
I
him here.
think, okay. I think we're picking up a pattern, which is, again, what I said, this principle of natural law asserts itself in ways that people don't expect. I will also say that just from some of the comments in the chat, people, certainly at least the ones following me on Facebook, are well aware of the lies about Ukraine and Russia. Someone writes, these people are not gods nor your masters. Down with them all by any means necessary. But part of it is this judo principle, which is that if you tell the truth and you organize based on universal principles, you create the conditions where your adversary can destroy themselves. That's really what we have to do. Now, I just want to ask, have you heard anything from Jerry? Has he called?
No, he has not reached out to me at all.
All right. I'm just sending a text over because I want to make sure he knows that he disappeared.
Yeah, and he's still not going yet. Okay, no problem.
All right. Otherwise, if there's questions, people can send them into Facebook or YouTube. Also, I'll just take a moment to a word from our sponsor. We are in the thick of the ballot access fight. So anyone listening from the state of New York, if you want to get petitions to circulate to put my name on the ballot, please visit sareforsenate.com. That's SAREFOR senate.com and sign up to volunteer. We'll be in touch with you right away, or you can call 646 328 1932 646 328 1932 to volunteer and help with the petitioning. Also, I will probably be involved in various legal battles on this front and printing a lot more literature. So if you'd like to make a donation, that will be gladly accepted as well. And if we, any sign of Jerry?
I am trying to reach him as well. We are might be joined by our normal co-host Dennis Speed in just a minute here.
Okay. Okay, I apologize, everybody. Someone's asking in Florida, can we help? Yes, absolutely. You can help by contributing funds. Also, share my material on social media. You may be able to reach people who are in New York who can petition. We do still need more people. If you want to come in and help with the petitioning, that's fine. Only registered New York voters can witness these signatures, but there's plenty to be done by people who come in from out of state. And I would just say it's very urgent. Schumer is one of the more bellicose members of the US Senate. He was very proud of having gotten the $87 billion of funding for the invasion of Iraq over the fake weapons of mass destruction. He is making insane statements regarding Ukraine and Russia right now, and really urgently needs to be defeated. And we need to build up enough of a headway with my campaign that he doesn't feel he can get away with saying these things with complete impunity, like no one's going to be responding or listening. There's Dennis. Welcome,
Hello.
Dennis. Jerry was just in the thick of the plot,
Well, I
and we
uh,
lost.
I was not listening. I was actually writing something for the briefing concerning this. But I don't know quite what happened. Maybe he'll get back on. Um, so where is he in Antigone? I understand, right?
Yes.
Because we got past Oedipus and Oedipus at Colonus, huh?
Well, I think, yeah, that's right. The question was not being able to bury him. I'm trying to this I don't know this drama very well, so I'm trying to put together all these pieces. So if
I
you
see.
want to
So
say
he was sort
something,
of right in the middle of trying to tell the whole plot of this.
yeah,
Well, yeah, this is a little bit difficult to pick up, and maybe what we should do is try to just get him back on. Um, since I was in the middle, I guess the one thing I can do um, is take up uh, something related to what Jose began with. He began with the England in 1819, right?
yep,
Is that the case? Okay, let
yes,
me try to take that since it's a little bit difficult to know exactly how to pick up where Jerry was, though I think I can figure out a couple of things. Um, but the England in 1819 we used because what we're trying to do is get across a very specific idea um, to people concerning the idea, and it's not symbolic. We're not trying to say that, for example, Joe Biden is the old, mad, despised, and dying king. It's not the idea. It's a little bit of a different idea. That's really the entire system. And in fact, I was just writing something for the briefing for tomorrow, which I'll just reference to you. It's in the middle of being written, so I'll just refer again to the text of the poem, the beginning of the poem, and say why we're taking this issue of tragedy up. I mean, that's the real point, and that I think I can do until either we find his internet or there he is. There he is.
Yeah,
So I'll
yeah,
just
yeah. I
finish.
got, I got back on. Yeah.
Great.
What
So let me.
what happened? When
We
did
don't
I?
know. You just went down.
Yeah, I know, but how far into it? What was I? Does anybody
Go ahead.
remember what I
Go
wrote?
ahead.
You were saying that it was the brother burying the brother, and the last words that came out of your mouth was that I think that she broke the law, and then her reply was, "No, you broke the law."
Okay, well that was a while ago, wasn't it? My screen was frozen. Could you see me?
No, nothing was
no, we
recorded,
lost
so
you.
you better pick this up since we're sort of right in the middle. A lot of this can be cut out, although the live audience is hearing all of this. So
Okay,
jump
well,
in.
okay, sorry. Uh, The NSA could be messing with us, but anyway. Um, so she says, "You broke the law," and she buries her brother. And in a very famous speech she gives, after he says, "Well, I cannot back off. You must be killed." Because there would be no force of law in my words if I didn't do what I said I would do. So she does it anyway. She does bury her brother. And she said, "This is for the gods to decide, not you. How the gods will dispose of who's good, who's bad. That is their decision now." The two brothers were dead because Oedipus had cursed them uh, when he was seized, or the attempt to seize him by Creon. But she makes a very important speech. She said, "It's not that I want to die. I'm looking forward to marrying his son, who's a good man. I'm looking forward to life. But if I have to violate everything sacred, I'll have to accept that judgment." So they take her, and rather than kill her on the spot, they take her to a cave and seal up the cave as a way of ultimately she would die and have no light of the sun. So the what happens to Creon, Tiresias comes to him, who starts the whole Oedipal cycle, and says, "You have made a terrible mistake, and if you do not correct that, your state will be destroyed." Now, Tiresias is never wrong. He's the one who was critical in all these dealings. So Creon finally says, "Oh my God," because he's now threatened his whole state is going to collapse. So by someone who he says is never wrong. So he rushes to the cave and he finds Antigone had hung herself. His son, in trying to free her, when he saw that she had hung herself, kills himself. And upon hearing that her son was dead, Creon's wife then kills himself. So at the end, he is sitting on his throne. His wife is dead. His son is dead. The Senate, who was kissing his butt the whole time, abandons him. And they end with the admonition, "Whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad." But mad in a very specific sense. As I said, not gibberish, incapable of responding to the population, its future, its well-being, and really its moral character. Incapable, doesn't even exist for them. Never existed for Creon. My words, I said it, and that's what makes the state. That's what keeps the state together. My power to execute, which is the beast man, which is fascism, right? But that's his weak flank, because at the end, everybody abandoned him because of Antigone and her courage and her ability to withstand the tyrant had mobilized the Senate to do something. to recognize that this has destroyed the state. And that's their weak flank. They're in a, and it also makes them deadly dangerous, but is their weak flank. And the more they display their insanity of a very specific sort, billion people are going to die, doesn't compute. The people of Afghanistan who did nothing are abandoned to die by starvation. These kinds of things. Then there's a reaction. And what Diane is capable of unleashing, and this campaign is capable of unleashing, is to galvanize the reality of the situation and change it because we know what to do. So that's, I hope you could hear it, but that's what I have to say.
Yes, we could hear it, and you're still with us, which is good.
Okay, good.
Do you want to say anything more about why is this relevant? Why people should think about this?
Well, sure, because it's not an analogy. You see, there are certain universal principles which are discovered. History is the elaboration of what is called boundary conditions. That at certain crises, there is what Shakespeare and of course Lyndon LaRouche went through this principle of tragedy, the inability to conceptualize a new capacity to deal with these crises leads one to the tragic results. But this principle, which all the great poets counterpose, you look at Oedipus, who was crushed through no fault of his own, but the fate has determined that in store, and he ran away. He tried to do what was right, which we discussed last night. And he achieved wisdom. He became sublime because he had nothing. And that doesn't always bring wisdom, but in Oedipus's case, it did bring wisdom. And Theseus, who founds Athens, is imparted that wisdom, as was the American Revolution. We were imparted wisdom through our founding fathers and their commitments to the future, or as our Constitution says, to the general welfare. First time in history, explicitly, a government based on general welfare. This principle cannot be violated. It's what we call natural law, cannot be violated. And that is precisely the weakness of our enemies. That's, I think, makes it vitally important that we understand what we're dealing with here and have no illusions that they're going to change. We have to change them.
Right. Well, thank you very much. We wanted to conclude because we have more meetings on the organizing of the petitioning. I just wanted to say one person commented that her heart is broken. And I have to say, I felt that because you see the tragedy unfolding, you see the number of innocent people dying. And I think what we have to bear in mind is that none of us is going to live forever. So the question is, what gives us our immortality? And can we act in such a way that people whose lives have been taken so soon also have their immortality? And I was thinking of these young Russian soldiers, for example, because clearly Russia is losing more soldiers as a result of their efforts to avoid killing civilians. In other words, they could have just given the weaponry they have. If, as the media narrative says, they were just trying to take Ukraine, they could have just dropped a bunch of mega bombs and not lost soldiers like the cowardly President Obama. You just kill people with drones remotely and you don't have boots on the ground and you don't call it a war. But instead, because of the desire to protect the civilian population and hit Nazi and military strategic targets, the losses are greater. This can't be done as quickly. So, what, how is that worthwhile? And I think this question of actually bringing about a new paradigm, creating the situation where mankind can be the immortal species, is really what our mission is. And in that sense, it's it's helpful to feel the pain of the sacrifice that people are making, whether they intend to, whether they're aware of it or not, as a kind of a strength for us to do what we have to do to ensure that mankind is able to survive. And I think that's really where we are at this moment. Um, Everything is on the line. If we can come through this, if we can crush this horrific evil which is trying to snuff out human civilization, then we will be that much more liberated, and we are really on the brink of a potential great renaissance. And the people of the United States have an absolutely enormous role to play in this at this moment. So again, I'd like to encourage everybody to please be active with my campaign. If you're in New York, we need you. If you're not in New York, we need you. Get the word out. Share this on social media. Share my website. And we're not going to give up. That's simply not allowed. And I think that the universe is constructed in such a way that justice will prevail, law will prevail. The form it will take has not been revealed to us yet. So that's what I would like to say. Thank you again very much. And with any luck, we'll be able to gather again here next week.